On this last Sunday of ordinary time before we enter into the season of Advent, Mother Church asks us to celebrate the feast of Jesus Christ, King of the universe, which is an exceptional feast. It's also a really cool title. But I think a feast that some days, weeks, months, years is harder to resonate with than others. That we can look around the world today and speak with our lips that Jesus has conquered sin and death, that Jesus is the King of kings and Lord of lords, and yet in our heart of hearts, wonder how true that is. That it certainly seems like there are an awful lot of kings in our day and age that don't pay much homage to the King of kings. That we look around our world and it feels like there's still an awful lot of sin and death to go around. So, what are we celebrating? And I think we have to keep in mind that while Jesus is King of kings, that his second coming is not yet here. That there will come a day when Jesus will conquer every nation, when every knee shall bow, and every tongue proclaim him king, but that day hasn't happened yet. And until that day, you and I are in enemy-occupied territory. That Jesus may be the rightful ruler here, but his enemy contests that and won't go down without a fight. And so it is our task as Jesus' disciples in an enemy-occupied country to do our part to engage in a little bit of rebellion and sabotage. What does that look like? 98 years ago today, we were given an awfully good example by Blessed Miguel Pro. That I think it's easy for us that we get this presumption that Mexico has always been a very Catholic country, but in the early 20th century, Mexico became profoundly anti-Catholic, to the point where it was illegal for a priest to even wear clerics, which interestingly was a law that was not officially taken off of the books until I was, I think, in middle school. That Mexico persecuted people greatly for their Catholic faith. And the persecution got so aggressive that people feared for their lives, even attempting to go to Mass on Sunday. And so Blessed Miguel Pro, whose feast day we celebrate today, began his studies for the priesthood in Mexico, but had to flee first to the United States and then to Europe to complete his studies. And felt compelled, because of his great love not only for his family, but his country and his people, once he was ordained a priest, to go back home and put that priesthood to good use. In spite of the fact that he could be put to death, that he hid himself under numerous disguises, and somebody might find a beggar showing up at their house to celebrate Sunday Mass. If they lived in a wealthier part of town, they might find him dressed up as in what old language would be, as a dandy, dressed up very well as if he were out on a date with a flower in his pocket, coming to celebrate Mass. It's told that Miguel Pro had a very good sense of humor, and so he probably threw himself into his costumes. But as long as that lasted, and he was able successfully to evade the authorities so that they couldn't catch him doing anything officially priestly, they finally got their way because there was a failed assassination attempt on the Mexican president. That he survived and used that as a convenient excuse to start collecting all sorts of enemies of his. That he could not find other excuses to put to death, and he used that he claimed Blessed Miguel Pro and his brothers were accomplices in the attempted murder. And in spite of the fact that the architect himself of the assassination attempt said that the pros had nothing whatsoever to do with it, that they didn't even interact with each other, the president didn't allow the truth to get in the way of his excuse. And so he arrested Miguel Pro and at least one of his brothers and had him put to death. The way I've heard the story told before, at least in a couple places, the hope was that because Miguel Pro was certainly courageous, but also a fairly sensitive person, that they brought in a camera crew to record his execution in the hopes that he might break down and cry before they put him to death. That they would love to have that captured in a photo so that they could use that to demoralize the Catholics who were rebelling against the government at the time. Miguel Pro, contrary to the hopes that they may have had, not only did not cry, but prayed for a moment before his execution, forgave the firing squad before they put him to death, refused the blindfold so that he could stare them right in the eyes, and declared Viva Cristo Rey as he held his arms out in a cruciform as they shot him to death. And one wonders if perhaps there was just a tinge of guilt that some of the firing squad felt after he forgave them, because in fact they failed to kill him with the first round of shots. Whether or not that was intentional, only God knows. So one of the guards had to come up and put a bullet into his forehead to end him. The government, in spite of the fact that they didn't get the photo that they wanted, nonetheless made sure that the photo they took was on the cover of every newspaper in the country the next weekend. Far from demoralizing Catholics, it inspired and united them in their opposition to the government, to the point where the image of him being shot to death with his arms out at his side in the form of a cross, in a sense, became the flag that united them, that they walked around with those newspaper covers held high around their country. That it was not long after Miguel Pro's martyrdom that finally the government caved and made concessions so that people could more freely practice their faith. While he was not allowed to have a proper Catholic funeral, and a priest was not allowed to be at his graveside, 40,000 Catholics accompanied his body to the cemetery, where 20,000 more were waiting for the arrival of his body so they could be there for the committal service. A priest was not allowed to pray it, and so instead Miguel Pro's dad did the honor. And I don't think any government official was going to throw his own father in prison for saying prayers over his son's grave. Miguel Pro did not, in spite of the government's claims to the contrary, attempt to assassinate their president. Miguel Pro's weapons were different ones and stronger ones than that. That Miguel Pro was armed with faith, with courage, and with forgiveness. And it was those weapons that unified and mobilized the Catholics in Mexico to take an even stronger stance against their government, which put itself in opposition to Jesus Christ. That government is overthrown. Jesus is still king. And so as we celebrate Jesus Christ, King of the universe today, and as Catholics, we wonder what we can do to proclaim that truth and to bring about the coming of his kingdom in a world that is enemy-occupied territory. I think slightly less than a century ago, Blessed Miguel Pro gave us a pretty good example. That if we want this earth to be Jesus's again, if we want this to be a place where our faith can be practiced freely, then it's going to demand some faith, some courage, and some forgiveness. that before the whole world proclaims Jesus Christ as King, may we not be afraid to hold our own arms out and declare Viva Cristo Rey. Jesus Christ, long live Jesus Christ the King.